All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 184. It is Tuesday night. This is when we like to talk to you about everything that's going on in college football. This offseason it's coming at us. It feels more than normal. I'm just there was a great Ross Dellinger tweet just a couple of days ago, and it summarizes the state of college sports. And I thought how chaotic this offseason feels because right now we're dealing with everything involving the transfer policy because there isn't one anymore, at least not with the current preliminary injunction by courts. The NCAA has not only can't police its NIL inducements, it said it's not going to, at least for the time being. We have all of these interesting court cases that are going on, some of which could cost the NCAA billions of dollars. There are several cases that are trying to deem athletes employees. That's one I'll say is inevitable. Today, Dartmouth, at least the basketball team, voted to unionize, and we can talk about that in a moment as well. We're dealing with the wonderful fight over the college football playoff format. My favorite is this. I don't necessarily like the model, but I think it's a funny name, the 3-3-2-2-1 model. And then again, there's lots of other things going on right now, and the amazing thing to me is I thought this offseason was going to be spent a lot talking about what's going on with the Florida State um, split, trying to get out of the ACC, but they've been completely overshadowed by all of these other things. So lots of things to talk about before we get into kind of the details. One story I wanted to mention because it's one of those kind of great ones. I don't know if you had a chance, just sort of silly things, but Barry Odom, UNLV's head coach, former, of course, Mizzou head coach, he wrote a bull for charity, like seriously, not a mechanical bull. Like he went to a rodeo being held at I forgot which casino. It's one of it's technically on the strip, but it's like one of the ones, South Point. I think it's South Point. And they were doing a charity like helmets and hats, cowboy hats and helmets, something to raise money for UNLV football. So he jumped on a bull called the Widowmaker. Didn't last long, actually. There's great video of him. He lasts on this bull for like 2 seconds, but man, I think he's pushing 50 at this point. I don't think he's quite 50 yet, but I'm in my 40s. That's bold to be able to hop on a bull and be willing to do that. So, one of those other kind of fun little things I just wanted to mention there. And on a slightly sadder note, it's Division Two, but Division Two Notre Dame. I'm going to underline that Notre Dame of Division Two. It's called Notre Dame College. They're going to be shutting down one of these smaller colleges. We're going to see more of those, I think, unfortunately. It isn't because sometimes people will just try to hang a different topic on it and say, oh, it's because kids know that they don't want to go to college anymore. It's like, it's not what's happening. And maybe to a lesser extent, the pandemic added to this, but we're about to see a demographic crunch. There was actually a really interesting article I read over the weekend where the biggest segment of the human population right now in the United States are kids. Well, okay, not kids, but those who were born in years 1990 and 1991. Anyone born in those years, that is like the crunch of the demographic shift. So, in about 2 years, we're going to actually hit a drop in the demographic numbers. So, kids going to school, from it's like 2025 to 37, those kids are actually going to be having far less competition because there's just going to be fewer kids out there. So colleges know that's coming, and that's one of those things that's kind of been playing into some of these kind of questions of how some of these programs are planning to handle the future. But all that said, lots of things to talk about. John, I see you want to come up here, so I'll let you up real quick. What's on your mind, John?
Hey man, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, thanks.
Hey, first question I have for tonight was regarding the rule changes that are being proposed right now. I think the main three being allowing teams to have tablets on the sidelines, um, allowing helmet communication, and the third one, which I think had the most conversation, was adding 2-minute warnings. Was kind of curious of what your thoughts were about it. Um, Personally, to me, the first two rule changes seemed pretty. It seemed like something that should happen years ago. Honestly, at this point, and I can't believe it took a Michigan uh, individual to get this rule influenced. But I'm happy he's coming in. But 2-minute warning is kind of a weird one. It feels like something that's really always been solely part of the pro game. The pro game. I understand why they're doing it, but it seems strange to even hear it.
Yeah, the 2 minute warning. I think a lot of people are decrying it as it just feels like another excuse for a commercial break right after they changed the rules ahead of last season to supposedly speed up the game, which added still a few more opportunities for commercials. It felt like, but that one's a little odd. But certainly, I think there's a unanimous consensus that bringing the player to coach helmet communication system, the use of tablets on the sidelines. I think those are things that folks are just happy. And I mean, they'll be every time you bring this up, they'll say, "Oh no, we were talking about it. The Connor Stallions thing wasn't the reason why." Yeah, but I think that kind of just sort of put a kind of a strong kind of underline on, man, why are we all waiting around for this? I mean, look, if you could, I think because again, so many of these rules exist because of the competitive balance. That was the whole reason why, the things that Color Stallion supposedly did were not fair or were not permitted. It wasn't because the P5 couldn't do it. It was because, and I hate to always pick Akron, but it was because Akron couldn't necessarily afford to do those same things. And the NCAA all teams have to be on the same page, at least in the old days of the NCAA. So um, the helmet communication thing was the other thing. Again, the cost prohibitive nature of it, but again, things have progressed. I think that's one of the nice things about loosening up a lot of these rules and allowing schools to throw some more money at it. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great. Um, was there a third one, or did I hit all? Did I hit what you were bringing up?
I think that was all three. It was the 2 minute warning, the tablets, and the
Yeah, yeah.
communications.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if someone decides to mess with the tablets somehow, but I don't think they will. That's strictly in the province of like MIT messing around with the Harvard Yale game and some of the antics they do. But I mean, maybe we'll get that. Somebody will hack into one of them and drop something interesting. Ski Masks Murphy, what's going on? How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Bobak. See, John's here too. Hope everyone's having a great night. It's a good Tuesday. Yeah, but I want.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it is striking how much stuff is still going on like that, like is more than just, the usual. It just seems like this off season, there's just so many things going on. I mean, I was kind of reviewing the week as it was, and there was just like story after story after story. Um, the NCAA, obviously, they've now said they're going to pause investigations into NIL violations, which they were kind of, they're just basically formalizing what that preliminary injunction last week forced them to do. So now, yeah, they're not going to be able to really enforce anything. So right now it's going to be a free for all. Then of course, yeah, the way the NFL Combine, that was kind of interesting. I don't really, I heard probably, and I'm sure this isn't the first time it was ever said, but I was listening to another show and somebody said like the NFL Combine is like the Olympics for college football, and I love that idea. That's what it is. We get to see college football. I mean, players go out there and perform their best, do things that may not necessarily translate into a game. But again, my colleague on another program, Sanjay Araja of CBS, he put it, like, look, it. People have the tape. This is just kind of like creating some kind of other barometers to sort of make sure what they're seeing on tape kind of goes with some of their raw talent. But still, I mean, you can be a combine superhero and not necessarily go anywhere. But I thought that was great. They should have like some American Gladiators type stuff on the combine, like just for fun. Maybe let players opt into like the joust or the eliminator and have them run around. That would make it even more exciting. And if especially since they're having all these NFL stadiums, there's room. You could totally have all of these things. Divide and conquer. That was like a great one in old school American Gladiators. I grew up with that stuff, man. That was still one of the best theme songs of all time. John, your hands up.
Man, you read my mind. Actually, I was about to suggest the same thing: American gladiator style competitions at the combine. But they're the gladiators here. I think the dudes who are actually going and playing against them have to be the biggest chirpers on Twitter, on social media. They have to come to the combine as well and actually go 1v1 with the player they chirped at all year at the
Oh
combine.
my gosh. I
Wait,
can think of
wait. Are you
some
talking?
sports journalists that could be funny in that. Oh, sorry, Ski
No.
Mask. Didn't mean to talk over you.
Oh no, because you did American Gladiators, and John, I was gonna bring it up, but John hit it right on the head. I I don't know everybody's age range here. Some of you may be too young to remember a channel called Spike TV, but amongst one of their hit shows outside of UFC and Slam Ball, they had a show called Pros versus Joes, where it was, you know, well, actually, not even like just regular pros. Most of it was like Hall of Fame or near Hall of Fame athletes in their respective sport, or like current All Pros at a sport, versus like people who were like D2 and D3 dropouts. And it was perfect and also hilarious. I remember the time Ron Harper literally almost beat a guy up playing basketball. But that'd be perfect for the combine. Just bringing all the
Oh
trolls
yeah.
and just watch them versus the actual NFL. Because
Yeah,
who
because I
did
mean,
it?
at this point, as long as they're getting the numbers they need, to gauge these players, I mean, why not have a little more fun with it? Have them do some things, and I think that'd be hilarious. My goodness, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of the interviews of players. Well, first of all, I think some people didn't realize, like Illinois tight end Tip Ryman, the birds aren't real. Like somebody asked him, have you ever seen? And I guess his responses were like, have you ever seen a baby pigeon? How do we know that power lines aren't pigeon recharging stations? Some people aren't quite in on the joke because that the birds aren't real thing has actually always been kind of a satire, and people who are into the satire totally sell it. It's always been kind of a parody of some of the other conspiracy theories. So I'm pretty sure that the tight end, the Illinois tight end, knew exactly. He was being tongue in cheek. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention Texas Tech's Tyler Owens, who apparently doesn't believe in space or as in other planets. That I never thought I would ever read that somebody doesn't believe in space because okay, I'm not even like, all right, I don't, okay, I understand the flat earth thing, but I don't agree with it. And I think it's totally absurd. And I'm just going to be 100% on that. But I mean, I'm pretty sure they still believe in space, right? But like, do we live in like a civilization map? Is that what he's thinking? Like there is no with two dimensions. And, here, just to tie those two together, people may have forgot, but Tyler Owens had one of the wildest kind of like just weird things that happened to him. Like he didn't do it like intentionally, but weird things that happened to him before a game at Texas Tech this season, back in October. He caught a bird, a pigeon pre-game. Like a bird was on the field and he just straight up like caught it. And then like he's looking at the bird almost a little confused, like, what do I do with this thing? And then he just kind of releases it, like, you're free. And I don't think if he checked if it was a real bird or a robot. I mean, but to me, that like tied the two stories together so perfectly. I'm going to drop that as a reply. Like, I think this video did not get seen enough during the season, but my goodness, it just sort of came to a head. It came to a head this time, so I just had to let me go ahead and drop this into the replies. Yeah, there we go. I just dropped it in there, so if you get a chance, be sure to look at that one and ask yourself if that bird is real or not. But my goodness, I see we have someone else who wants to join us. Mage Ingrid, I see you want to join us again. I'll let you up here. If you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to hit request. This is Tuesday night. This is when we talk about whatever in college football. My name is Bobak Ha'Eri. Another great tweet that came out of the college football, pardon me, the NFL Combine was that incredible because I mean Amarius Mims, Georgia lineman, big guy. He had a great combine to begin with, but there is just this fabulous photo of him if you haven't seen it, standing behind. I think it was one of some of the other players around the podium, and somebody just it was Ryan Fowler, who's a writer. He shared this tweet. I'll go ahead and drop that one into the replies as well. But he dropped this tweet of him just how big he is compared to the normal human beings because he's like what 6'7", 340 pounds, and I mean he's 340 pounds, but we're not talking like obese. Like he just is a large dude. And anyone who's ever covered, FBS football at the especially the P5 level, going to a media day or going to a game, or you can get really close to the players. But I remember the first time I covered a P5 media day, and you're going to interview these guys, and you just realize like I did not realize humans came this size. So yeah, no, he's a great example of that. So that was one of the lighter moments that came out of the combine this past week. Hey, Mage Ingrid, thanks for joining us.
Oh, hello again, sir. I had a question. So, Since Texas is moving to the SEC, are we gonna get the Texas versus Texas A&M rivalry back?
Oh yeah, yeah, we are. It's going to be. I believe it's the end of the regular season for them. I'm trying to remember. I don't think they because of, and again, I think it was a completely silly. They could have still staged the game. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that entire breakup after A&M left for the SEC was kind of a little bit lame because the game got put on hiatus for all that time. But yeah, they're going to play on November 30th at Kyle Field. So they're gonna that's gonna come back. But it used to be kind of like a Thanksgiving game, or at least closer to it. But they putting that on 12 years of break or however long it was. Unfortunately, they weren't going to try and go back to that particular day. But yeah, it's coming back, and you can imagine that's going to be some incredible hype. Hopefully, both teams are have a good enough season to make it exciting beyond just them, but nationally.
Oh, that'll be my first time watching the rivalry game. Actually, never watched it before.
Yeah, you're right. I guess it has been long enough that a lot of folks just haven't been familiar with it. I always forget that, as you get older, time passes and you're just kind of like, well, that was just like last year, right? And then you realize, no, it was actually a dozen years ago. It's like when I realized exactly how long it's been since the NCAA football game. Gosh, I should go ahead and mention. I had it in my notes, but one of the kind of the I know this has been because we were talking about players obviously who are going to be in the game. They're being offered $600 and a copy of the game. And Arch Manning has apparently said he is not going to be in the game. He turned it down. Then there was a follow-up report that he wants to wait till he's, quote, the guy at Texas before opting into EA Sports College Football. Another one was like, I think the earlier quote was he wanted to focus on the game, or he didn't want to distract from it. And people were like, how is this going to distract from you being a player? Some were joking that maybe he saw he was going to get like a 72 rating or something. And he's like, nope. Yeah, no, I don't know. I haven't heard if Shador Sanders is going to be in there either. This brought up an interesting question of whether or not
That's
those two
interesting.
are actually especially with everyone who's now leaving for the draft. You got some incredible quarterbacks. You got Marvin Harrison Jr. You got some great talent. Are those two the biggest names for lay people? I'm not talking like if you're listening to this show on a Tuesday night in the off season, you're pretty much a serious college football fan. I'm talking about the people who just have no idea who anyone is in college football. They might be, oh, I know who Arch Manning is. I've heard that name, or maybe Shador Sanders. But no, that's an interesting one. John, I see your hand up. Ski Master Murphy, I see your hand up, and I'm going to level up Luke as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, that comment regarding Texas A&M, Texas, I'm pretty sure my knees just creaked hearing that statement. Um, oh, that was rough. But yeah, actually, I did have a side note and quick question regarding about Reggie Bush and the Heisman. I know Johnny Manziel made a statement this week saying he would no longer participate at the Heisman ceremony. Which I know a lot of people said, hey, maybe he's just going out and he's going out and just maybe trying to get some publicity or just trying to get some attention. But honestly, I have to salute him. I think it's really a shame that no other Heisman participants in the ceremony have not tried to speak out or at least try to protest in some way to something that's getting kind of ridiculous at this point. I mean, we're talking about players getting compensated for video game likeness and $1 million deals and jet deals, and then but we still have to we still have to see this week to week with wondering when if Reggie Bush will ever get his Heisman back.
Yeah, absolutely. Ski Master Murphy.
Oh yeah, I guess two comments. I'm gonna start with John's first. Yeah, everybody has been, everybody wants Reggie Bush to get his Heisman back except the NCAA. No one knows why, and it's also weird considering that the Heisman is not like a NCAA award. It's like a total external thing, which is also weird. That it's like, oh, the NCAA said they're not letting him back in, so we shouldn't give him an award. But it's like it's for on-field play, regardless if he got paid or not. He still performed on the field, so he should get his award back. And Mage Ingrid, you said you never experienced, Texas A&M versus Texas. I don't know if you live within the area, but I will say my experience in Atlanta with Georgia versus Georgia Tech. If you're able to go in person, there's nothing better than experiencing pure college football hate. It's one of a kind. I don't know why we're this crazy, but it's the best.
Yeah, I'm from Atlanta, so thank you for the suggestion. I didn't know if it was a good rivalry or not for Georgia versus Georgia Tech. I've heard it, but I don't hear too much though.
Oh, it'd be a fun one to go to, though. We've had people go to that, and they've I've heard nothing but good things for sure. Hey, Level Up Luke, what's going on?
Hey, Bobak. I am on my way back home from Clemson, watching my team get dog walked down there. It's a rainy, nasty weather night, and I guess this is the bright spot of my night is joining you. So appreciate it. Yeah, I don't care for USC, but like Ski Mask said, we all want Reggie Bush to get the Heisman back, and I thought that was the decision of the Heisman Trust. Not the NCAA, but whatever. Johnny Manziel putting out a statement about it not agreeing with his morals and ethics is pretty hilarious. But yeah, more like credible Heisman winners should absolutely join in, I would assume. But yeah, my question, we recently had in this neck of the woods an announcement that Manchester United and Liverpool are going to do an exhibition game at U.S. or South Carolina stadium here, Willie Bryce. And so that kind of made me think, if memory serves, and you can check me on this, I think one of the highest attended college football games was an exhibition in Australia in the early 1900s. I want to say over 100,000, like 120, 130,000 attendance. If you could just have a fantasy destination for an exhibition college football game anywhere in the world, where would you like to see it the most?
Oh, I love that one. I've got a couple in mind. I like some of the wackier stadiums out of there, or just some of the more exotic locations. So one I've always thought would be fun is this stadium. I think it's technically called the Float, which is like a floating soccer pitch. So therefore, it could fit a football field on it, right? And it's in like this inner bay in like a lagoon in Singapore. So the background is that really cool Sands Marina Hotel, the one that looks like a three towers with a surfboard sitting across the top of it. It's really cool, like area, like their big Ferris wheel, all that stuff is on this lagoon, right? So they've got this floating field. So I thought, wouldn't that be wild? Otherwise, it'd be like, they've got a Monte Carlo or something like in Monaco playing that stadium, or, somewhere interesting where it's an exotic location, give the players an opportunity to see something really different. Or just go back to Japan while we're at it. I mean, they do play games there now, and certainly, obviously, the Ivy League's been doing that All-Star game, which they've now split with the Japanese All-Star team they play. But my goodness, I just go back to the Reggie Bush thing. So I'm obviously incredibly biased on this because I went to USC, right? So I thought the whole thing was nonsense at the time. But yeah, it would be interesting to see some of these others because I'm kind of I see all the arguments for the for Johnny Manziel's coming and making that statement versus like someone else. But it'd be interesting if we had someone kind of like go really far back, like Eddie George or somebody, Gino Torretta, Desmond Howard, someone of that era to kind of come up and say it. I do wonder. I was just saying, and this is totally a side note. We weren't really talking about this, but we were talking about how lay people are familiar with certain players that college football fans might think there's others they might know. Because I was having this whole conversation like, wouldn't Quinn Ewers be better known of the current players, the ones that are going to be playing in college next season, than Arch Manning? And I'm like, you know what, I think there's an inherent bias for those of us who watch sports and know some of these starting quarterbacks where names are bigger than that. I mean, there's probably some folks in this Heisman conversation probably made me think there are probably some folks who think Deion Sanders won the Heisman. I mean, just because, he was a really good player, he's really famous, he must have won it too. Which of course he did not. But again, it just got me kind of thinking about that. Ski Master Murphy, your hands up.
Oh yeah, I just had a warning for Level Up Luke. I was in Michigan when Manchester United also played a game at the Big House. Just stay away if you're not trying to attend, because the amount of people you're going to see in the area is going to be more than you ever seen in your life in that area.
Yeah, man, I'm a big soccer guy, so I always try to ask these crossover questions. but I have no intention of it, man. Wrexham played at Chapel Hill last year, and the tickets started at like $350. No, thank you.
Wow.
Yeah,
But
yeah. When I was in Michigan, the restaurants doubled the price of everything on their menu, and all the restaurants in Ann Arbor,
it sounds like
in the media
F1.
area.
This sounds like
I
what people
mean,
are doing to the F1 fans in Vegas. My goodness.
it sort of is. I'm also a big soccer guy. Grew up playing it. This, I think they call it like the American Champions Tour or whatever. It's like it's the only time you're gonna see these teams match up outside of the Champions League. So it's still a big thing, even though they're just friendlies.
See, and I just love the fact that Minnesota, the state, hosted that one World Cup qualifier several years ago when it was like Guatemala had to come and play the USA team in the Allianz
That was
Field
awesome,
in
dude.
like January. That was fantastic.
That was so fun.
Speaking of, since we're talking a little bit of soccer, although this one is not quite, this one isn't even MLS, but it is somewhat related to college football and soccer. But so there is a team that's been in the works. They're delayed it by a year, but UTRGV, which is the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, which is actually a combo university. It's not that old. It was a combination of I forgot, like UT Brownsville and UT Permian Basin. So it's in Edinburgh and Brownsville, Texas, right? So they announced they're going to add. They had hired Mac Brown as a consultant before he became the North Carolina head coach when he was still doing TV. And they decided, all right, we're going to start a football team. They announced they're going to be, I guess, in the WAC in 2025. It was going to be this upcoming season, but they had to push it back a year. They're going to be the Vaqueros. And so the question was where they're going to play. So Edinburgh had a USL soccer stadium, HEB Park. And I guess their USL team just folded after their past season. So the school has bought this 2017 program, this 2017 stadium. It's across town, but it's not a big town. It's like a 10-minute drive from their campus. So yeah, this small soccer stadium, not that small, but is now going to be the inaugural home of Vaqueros football when they launch as an FCS team in a couple of seasons. So there you go. We were talking about that, I know, a few shows ago, especially after Kansas announced that they're going to be playing their non-conference home games in the MLS stadium in Kansas City, Kansas. So, it's always good to see some of these stadiums getting used, and that's just too convenient because, I mean, for those who also aren't familiar, UTRGV bought the local minor league baseball park as well, which is now their baseball field. So they've been kind of that school has been sort of helping, take care of some of these lackluster sporting venues, or at least lackluster ideas that didn't quite pan out, even though they built, brand new venues for them. So great. I mean, the university is going to be there. They're not moving. They're not shuttering. So awesome for them. And one thing we haven't had a real chance to talk about, because again, I love the name, but it's kind of a dumb idea. The idea of like so for those who aren't familiar, obviously next season we're going into the 12-team playoff. It's only for 2 years because that was just the way the deal was struck, when they created the playoff, and then they agreed to make the final 2 years of this initial deal to be a 12-team playoff. The only change there is they accounted for the implosion of the Pac-12 conference. So instead of 6 automatic qualifiers from or 6, I should say, conference champs plus 6 at-large teams, it's going to be 5 conference champs. So the G5 will get 1 in, and then 7 at-large teams. But it looks like they're trying to expand it starting in 2026 season, the 2026-2027 season. And I guess the number that's starting to seem cogent is 14. A lot of I wouldn't say pushback, but there's been a lot of hand-wringing about it because we haven't even had 12 teams yet. And this new model, because again, the reason why would they be wanting to go to 14? The reason is the SEC and Big Ten have, as we know, they've created this strategic planning group, or whatever they're calling it, not an alliance, but the strategic planning group. They basically are trying to push on everyone that we want automatic qualifiers. We don't want just our conference champ. We want 2 or actually, it sounds like they initially said 4, but now they've retreated to 3. They want 3 teams from each of their conferences to automatically be in the playoff. It's kind of a little silly because it's hard to imagine a year where they wouldn't already do that. But in order to appease everyone, it sounds like they've also agreed, and this actually would probably be a better deal for the other 2 conferences, that the Big 10, probably the Big 12 and the ACC would also get 2 automatic qualifiers. And then with 1 automatic qualifier, the conference champ of the G5. So this model is being bandied about as the 3-3-2-2-1 format. There'd still be, I believe, if my math is right here, there'll still be 3 spots for at-large teams in addition to that. Not entirely a popular plan because, again, it seems a little absurd to codify something that would happen. I think the ACC and Big 12 might get away with a little bit more. The only reason I say that is on another program I do, again, with Shahan J. Raja. We were actually mapping out hypothetical, like, if at this moment in time, who would you project to make it through the season and be into a 12-team playoff? When you actually go through it, you end up with some striking results. I mean, I don't think people realize exactly how wacky the college football playoff is going to be, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. But when we mapped it out, the top 12, like for example, the top 4 seeds have to be conference champs. So both of us thought, okay, Utah's probably got the best chance of winning the Big 12 this season. So that means, presumably the SEC and Big 10 in one way or the other, Ohio State and Georgia, those 2 will probably be the number 1 and number 2 seed in one order or another. But then 3 and 4 will probably go to the ACC and Big 12 champ, unless some G5 team shocks the universe and climbs into the top 4, right? So that would mean like Utah would be number 3, and I thought perhaps Clemson might be the ACC champ, so they would be number 4. Shahan went really wild and thought Louisville might make it all the way. Maybe Florida State. While we're talking about the Big 12, Kansas State and Oklahoma State certainly are possible viable teams, but those are going to be the top 4 seeds. So I don't think people are going to realize that for the next 2 years, those teams are all going to get buys. And then you look at the rest and you see how they all cut out. We could only come up with 1 extra team from the combination of the ACC or Big 12 getting an at-large. And even then we were thinking, there's going to be a chance that some of these SEC and Big 10 teams that we're not thinking of might have a great year. And suddenly they're the at-large team, like a Mizzou. Mizzou wouldn't be a surprise this year, but like as of heading into last year, no one would have expected Mizzou to do as well as they did. So I think that this 14 team model could potentially benefit those 2 conferences because between them we could only come up with 1 extra team. But I know that's not the most popular thing. The thing that people are really pushing back on in the ACC and Big 12, the SEC and Big 10 are trying to push so that if it's a 14-team model, only 2 teams are going to get first-round buys, and they want to ensure that it's their conference champs. That one is absolutely getting pushback only because Clemson is a great example of a team that kept making the top 2 that is in the ACC, and it would be ridiculous in the mind of the ACC to allow that to happen. Let's see here. Ski Mask Murphy, I saw your hand up first, and then we'll go Mage Ingrid, and we'll go to Level Up Luke.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk about like the ridiculousness of the scenarios and what they're trying to put out, but because you're a lawyer and you have an understanding of like having to negotiate under fair practices, and being that ESPN has like first right of refusal for like the next playoff contract, being that the playoff is like the main thing, and I mean we talk about ESPN having control of like the rest of the bowl games. Do you think ESPN is going to be able to hold on to this contract with the 12-team playoff when everybody else is going to come into bid on it? Because like the playoffs way more profitable than any bowl game. It's basically the NFL playoffs in a little bit. Like people are going to watch. Do you think ESPN holds on?
Well, actually, the thing is, ESPN sounds like they were the only ones to bid on it again. That's actually the quirky situation going on here that has been putting a little extra heat under coming to this potential, re-expanded playoff because Bill Hancock, who's generally known for being a very kind of, we're gradual, things will come when they do. He's been saying like, no, we got to get this done because what happened was they started putting out feelers for the next, media deal for the college football playoff. Um, and it turns out it was ESPN again that won it. I believe the things that we learned from this were, number one, the media market's a little softer than people expected. The usual players like Fox and CBS, NBC, whoever, just didn't feel that they wanted to compete at the level, at least pay the amount that ESPN was willing to pay. And the amount that ESPN has offered is not necessarily as much. I mean, it's still a lot of money, and they're going to increase the total amount of money that gets spread around. But it seems like this is lower than what the college football playoff had hoped. I forgot the value they put on those first round games, but it was surprisingly low. It was lower than expected, and that's where I think some of the confusion's coming in because ESPN's already said like we don't really value these first round games, and this 14 team model would simply add two more first round games. So it's been one of these moments where it's kind of a shrug. It seems like it's less about the TV money that would necessarily be added as much as to guarantee a bigger cut of what money that does come in goes to the SEC and the Big Ten. So I think it's more of a mix of guaranteeing money in, but also, frankly, those conferences are now so big, trying to also potentially please so that you don't have a moment where perhaps some of your teams don't get into the playoff and get really upset. But I mean, somebody went back and calculated even under the 12-team model, like the last, decade of the college football playoff, and there was like maybe only 1 year where, three of these teams didn't come from each of those two conferences if they were made up of the current layout, the ones that are going to be in next season, not at the time. But that's the thing. The ESPN, oddly enough, is less to do with what's going on at this moment, only because they're the only bidder. I should clarify. So the way they're creating this current media contract that's going to be coming up, and part of the reason Bill Hancock is pushing them to come up with this design as soon as possible is ESPN hasn't technically finalized it because there is no playoff model. The worst case scenario that could happen is you anger the SEC and the Big Ten so much that they say, okay, after the next two seasons are done, we're not in the college football playoff. We're going to create our own playoff, which would be a disaster. We'll just set that aside. But obviously, ESPN then would be stuck, with a playoff that doesn't involve those two conferences. So that's kind of the real push here. It's not because ESPN's necessarily going to offer them more money. It's just that they want to make a deal with somebody, and ESPN won't make a deal until they have a college football playoff model. And I guess using this pressure, Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey are trying to make sure that they have at least three teams each year in the playoff, plus a fight for those three at-large spots that would be made available. So it's kind of a quirky situation, and one where, honestly, for a rare moment, the TV deals are actually taking a back seat to this kind of politicking by the conferences. Mage Ingrid.
Oh yeah, I remember what a few weeks back I was watching Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt because he was talking about if the last season we had with the if the college football playoff was 12 teams and with the 5+7 format, if it happened this past season, I think he said Liberty would be in. I think that's what he said. I can't remember, but
Yeah, they would
he
have
was
been. They
talking.
would have been
Yeah.
the top
Okay.
G5 conference champ.
Okay. Dang, this is good. This is getting interesting. But like, why they doing like going to like 14 or 16? I'm like, you barely be giving the 12-team playoff a chance to like even breathe, for, like people to get used to it.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's totally absurd. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, the only reason we're looking at this, it's because to be fair, when they negotiated the 12-team model, this is before the conferences flew apart in this last round. So I think that's, again, I'm not trying to say that it's sensible to move to 14, but I can at least draw a line with this is because suddenly the SEC and Big Ten are like, wow, we have so many more teams than we first had when we were first talking about a 12-team model. So now they want to make sure more of their teams get in. But when you do the math, at least in the previous decade, yeah, those same number of teams would have probably got in anyway. And I mean, hopefully you don't want a year where some just complete basket case of a team gets in over an ACC or Big 12 team that is more favorable. Now, granted, it's not going to be the champion we're talking about in those kinds of hypotheticals, but yeah, it's going to be weird. It's going to be odd to see how this plays out. John.
Going back to the playoff as well. I know it's very unlikely, especially considering how the two teams have been performing lately. But what happens if we have a Navy Army situation? They seem pretty uncertain. They seem pretty firm on not
Yeah.
making the game. And like I said, I know, ski mask, I know. But I mean, if it does happen sometime, the next 5, 10, 20, 30, who knows how many years from this point. I mean, what does the committee do in that type of situation where you have a game that's technically after the championship week is over?
Yeah, no, this has come up because it's basically because now Army and Navy are in the same conference. They're both in the American starting this season. I mean, the only independent that isn't Notre Dame is UConn. But setting that aside, so they, for those who don't remember, the Army Navy game was previously a week earlier. And then they got so put because there weren't that many conference title games. And when the conference title games expanded and that became like conference title weekend, Army Navy wanted to be the only thing, which I don't blame them. It's an absolutely amazing experience. So they moved to the week they're in now, which is after the conference title games. Are kind of their own situation. And then the college football playoff, they agreed, okay, if there is a scenario where Army or Navy, and Navy has had a season once in a while where you're kind of like, oh, maybe they would be the G5 or something like that. But if there was ever a situation where they might have been contending for the top 4 spots, they were going to wait and do the final ranking after the game. But I think everyone kind of knew that that was unlikely. It's probably going to be even less likely in the college football playoff scenario. But I have a feeling Army and Navy are going to be asked to sort of, either you accept the fact that you may not have as good of a shot at making the college football playoff as the G, because I don't think anyone's ever going to expect them to become an at-large. I just don't think that's realistic. Army, Navy, the things, especially with the NIL world, it's just completely changed. It's impossible to think that either of those teams will ever get in the playoff unless they win the American Conference. But beyond that, it's like, look, you guys value and Army and Navy value that game, I think, more than anything, and there's a great reason why. It's as someone pointed out, it's as much about recruiting for the Army and the Navy, like as branches of the military as the game itself as a sporting event. So they that value is so tremendous that they're willing to sacrifice potentially whatever extra benefit they might get than had they moved it earlier, because I'm sure, and this is where it gets interesting too, because I don't know how that's going to work with the conference, probably the American Conference title game. And I admit I'm a little fuzzy on that, because theoretically, couldn't they also meet in an American Conference title game if they're in the same conference? I mean, do they have divisions in the American next season? Oh my goodness, that's a great question.
They're
Ski Mask
divisionless.
Murphy, I see you unmuted.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was gonna say they're divisionless, and I'd raise my hand because I know I think it was the season before COVID. I believe that was the season where Army was like actually ranked heading into like the last few weeks of the season, and I think like they had one game. They were like the week before conference championship week. If they won that game, they would be in the title. And so they had already like ESPN like put it up and said like, hey, if Navy's in the conference championship game, then because they also still have a game to play after the conference championship game, whether they win or lose, they said they immediately push like the announcement date like the day after the Army Navy game, which I think was like that, which is like on a Tuesday. So instead of a Sunday, they were like, "Hey, here's the tentative schedule. We may be on Wednesday or Sunday. We'll let you guys know." So I mean, they have a plan for it, but it's also funny that they have to have a plan for a contingency that, if it does happen, will be great.
Yeah, it would be absolutely wild if Army and Navy end up playing in that conference title game and then playing the Army Navy game like the week later. I didn't even think about that, but that's completely a plausible scenario now.
Wait, or do they cancel it?
Yeah, I know. What do they do? Do they subsume it? Do they just do Army Navy a week early, or do they just cancel the title game And
or
because
they come,
I'm sure the
or they come back
contracts
a
have
week
got to have
late.
some details on that. I'd be shocked if that isn't in some of these arrangements for bringing Army into the
It,
American.
they could possibly like push it a week back, where it's like, hey, we're not playing championship week, we're playing the week after for the championship. That's probably the more suitable idea.
Now I want this to happen in the first year, just because I want to see the mess that people are going to be trying to solve at the end of the season. Oh my goodness! I see Cody. We let you up here, and then I see Mage Ingrid and Level Up Luke. I know you wanted to come back and join us, so I'll let you up as well. But Cody, what's on your mind?
Hey, sorry, I was late, so if I speak on anything that you guys already talked about, just let me know. I'm sorry. So kind of carrying off of the Army Navy, I'm not trying to sound like an old head here. I'm really not. But to me, watching the Army Navy games is one of the last pure things I think college football has. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong on that. I just watch the Army Navy game and I think of old school college football, what I grew up on. It wasn't about the BCS. It was just about two teams that hated each other. Then that's all that mattered. I could be wrong, but I just wanted to talk about USC real quick. I'm a USC fan. I've been reading that pretty much Miller Moss is guaranteed that job. I wanted to hear your thoughts on the quarterback battle. I know they brought in the guy from UNLV. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the USC quarterback. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you. No, Miller Moss. I mean, has there ever been a guy who came off the bench, finally got his shot, who had been super patient, when Caleb Williams came in, sat through 2 seasons of Caleb Williams, and then hearing everyone was asking the whole season, well, who are they going to get out of the portal to replace Caleb Williams? Is it going to be Cam Ward? Is it going to be, the guy from K-State who ended up going to Ohio State? Like, who are we going to get? Who are we going to get? And then who just patiently waited, and then when he got his chance, walked in the Holiday Bowl and absolutely obliterated Louisville. And to the point where basically ruined the transfer portal chances for the top guys that might have considered USC. And that's not to insult the UNLV guy. He's a good quarterback, but he's also a younger quarterback. So you can have both. Like, you could have one and then he'll get his shot kind of moment. I mean, we'll see how that pans out come spring. But I mean, yeah, no, it really does seem like Miller Moss is to lose. And if anything, the USC offense, while it wasn't perfect, I mean, we'll see how the O-line, if it firms up. The big distraction about that defense and the rebuild they're doing and the incredible hires they've done. Again, many teams have hired incredible coaches who just for some reason don't pan out when they get to their new destination. But I mean, it seems optimistic what they're doing right now. So I think there's an opportunity for that to play out. But I think as of this point, and I mean, again, the spring game could change everything. I think Miller Moss is probably the leader in the clubhouse right now because of that incredible performance he had in the Holiday Bowl. Because, I mean, yeah, that we hadn't talked about it, but that quarterback battle seems like it got definitely cranked down a notch rather than up. And especially compared to some of the other ones that are going to be happening across the country this spring. But that was a great question. Mage Ingrid, what's going on? I know your hand's up.
Oh, hello again. It's about the playoff again. So for the new 12-team playoffs, so we still have the New Year's Six Bowls, and if I remember correctly, four's gonna be think quarterfinals, and then we're still gonna have 2 semifinals. So are they gonna be still rotating?
Yeah,
Pretty much.
yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. So there were the New Year's Six Bowls, right? So the New Year's Six Bowls are going to rotate. 4 of them are going to be on a given year the quarterfinals, and then 2 of them will be the semifinals. And then the national championship will still be this kind of bidding process to be a random stadium around America. Like, it was NRG this past season, was SoFi the season before, was Lucas Oil the year before that, etc. So yeah, it's gonna now, and it's gonna be Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta this upcoming championship game. But yeah, the New Year's Six are still gonna be part of the playoff. If they're just gonna rotate who's a quarter and who's a semi, and then the first rounds, of course, going to be home games. But yeah, great question. Level Up Luke.
Hey, Bobak. I think I have a reception again, but apologies if I cut out. So first off, I don't like the 3-3-2-2-1. I just don't like the automatic qualifiers. I've heard it called the Champions League model, and I've heard the
I think we're losing you a little bit there, but I want Ski Mask Murphy to jump in because I know he knows soccer really well, and I know he wanted to jump in on that Champions League comment.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask to see if I can for anyone else. But oh yeah, I can carry the torch on the Champions League comment. Or yeah, I guess that is sort of how I mean, that is exactly how the Champions Leagues work in European soccer, where certain countries, their leagues get more teams automatically into the Champions League. But I think for college football, I don't think it's. I think when you look at like them expanding the college football playoff, you got to look at it similar as to March Madness. You need basically the storylines. Like I'm pretty sure Bobak, you probably heard the term where like everything's wrestling. You sort of need those storylines, and I think if they give too many automatic qualifiers, I think the thing they're going to miss out in the college football playoff that March Madness has is a Cinderella story because that's everybody's going to automatically have a team to cheer for. Who to most people is like, oh, they're from the middle of nowhere. We've never heard of them. Let's see what happens. And I think leaving things as they are now, especially with one group of five team getting in, and I think we're probably gonna have a season where two get in because you're gonna have a Boise State TCU BCS bus situation, which I think will be great. But the automatic qualifiers, it's not gonna work out like it used to.
Absolutely. Hey Cody, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So I had a question. So with the expanded playoffs, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline on everything. I know USC announced in June of 2022 that they were leaving for the Big Ten, and I think they expanded the playoffs not too long ago. I could be wrong. So my question is, what does the Pac-12 look like if this expansion happened? They announced in like 2020 or 2021. Do we have a full Pac-12 still, or are we kind of in the same boat regardless of the expansion?
You know, that's a great question, and there's been some interesting writing on this because the step that kind of, I don't know if it messed it up or whatever, but they came up with the idea of the 12-team playoff, and everyone was on board. But then suddenly, Texas and Oklahoma announced they're going to the SEC. That really angered the three of the P5. That's when you saw the alliance between the Big Ten, Pac-12, and ACC, which of course ended up being hardly productive. But for that brief time they were in alliance, the only thing they managed to do was slow down the playoff talk to the point where it was pushed until this upcoming season when it should have been the season that just happened. So coincidentally, the ACC was partly responsible for the reason why Florida State got bumped out of the playoff this year. You can say other reasons why, but I mean, if they had the 12-team playoff, the Florida State would have absolutely been in as the ACC champ, and they would have had a first-round bye. But so all of that said, the alliance, what did it end in? It ended in the Big Ten poaching USC and UCLA, who were also happy to leave. It's hard to say because, you know, as much as now, because right now there's conversation of, does Florida State really want to leave the ACC for the potential SEC or wherever they would end up when they have a better shot at making the playoff in the current ACC makeup than either the two super conferences they might join, right? Because I mean, sure, Clemson would be a solid team. You know, North Carolina once in a while, NC State theoretically could be a good team. Louisville obviously proved that they have some oomph to them and all of that stuff. But still, I mean, that's a more reasonable group than what you might see if they were to join the SEC or the Big Ten. You know, of course, the money is not quite the same. The TV dollars the conferences get are substantially more. But the thought was, if you're consistently a playoff team, would you be making up that difference in donors, you know, being excited about the program, wanting to donate money? Could that make up the difference? I'm not sure. But that's conversation hasn't come up in all of this. But as to whether that would have stopped it from ever happening had the had the playoff arrived, and would that have stopped the Pac-12? The Pac-12 had so many other bigger problems there. I mean, I was just reading about, George Kliavkov just left, and it was didn't really say anything. It sounds like the rumors, I think Wilner, John Wilner, the Pac-12 reporter out of the San Jose, he was kind of like, basically he was blaming everything on the way out, and I can't really blame him. Larry Scott created such a hole to work with that realistically, I'm not sure what he could have done. The TV market's changed so much. This kind of actually ties in an earlier topic because, again, I've mentioned it before, but it seems like the Pac-12 unfortunately also got a taste of what media deals might become in 2030 when the next really big media deals start to come about. Because with the slow erosion of, I should say, of cable deals, traditional terrestrial cable deals, the cord cutting that is occurring, these channels don't have the same amount of money they used to. So that kind of came into the conversation, as I mentioned, when the most recent college football playoff media deal came up, because only ESPN really bid on it. The others had an opportunity. Fox just didn't bid on it. The CBS didn't really bid on it. I mean, the way ESPN's deal, if it finalizes, and again, it won't finalize until they have a plan for the playoff beyond 2025, 2026. They could, I believe, sublet, or however you want to put it. Another, like Fox could pay them for a first round game, and they would just pay ESPN, and then Fox will get to broadcast it. But right now, all the rights are with ESPN simply because there's less money to go around, and the others just weren't willing to pay into it. So, all of that said, it's hard to tell. I don't think the playoff, even if it started earlier, would have necessarily saved the Pac-12 because the money just was not there at all, and there was enough, I think, resentment over the handling of a conference. And I know, for example, USC and UCLA were a little annoyed with the amount of distribution, in the sense that they didn't feel like they were getting their fair cut for how much media they pull in and how many people tune in because of the Los Angeles schools. But it's a good question, though. John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just relating back to the playoff as well. Is there ever a point that we're really going to be hitting a true max number for this playoff at this point? I say that because now with the expanded playoffs, there's the possibility a team plays 16, 17 games a season now, which I hate to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I think that's crazy for a college athlete to be playing, for an 18 to 22-year-old be playing that much on that high performance level where injuries keep increasing every year when players are getting faster and stronger. I mean, is there going to be a point where we hit a max number, just out of the sake of player safety, or do we just try to keep greed pulling until and as long as the check's clear?
Man, I honestly, maybe the answer starts to come with one of the other bigger stories that could have wrapped this offseason, which is where if players become employees and we see CBAs, collective bargaining agreements, is that when we start to see limits on what the teams can do with regards to the players and expanding it? My goodness, it's a good question. Let's see here. A couple of other hands up, and then we can slowly probably start wrapping this up. But Level Up Luke.
All right, I have reception. I'm definitely back. So that tied in really nicely with. I have a question about how far realistically are we from the players having contracts which keep them at schools and allow the NCAA to have a more logical year-round calendar without as much freedom to transfer throughout the year? Do you think that's coming up in the near future, or they basically have to be employees at that point,
Yeah,
right?
it seems like it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Really, the only way it seems like the schools could ever get control over the transfer window, especially with these legal the injunctions that have kept the NCAA from enforcing anything on the transfer rule, enforcing anything on NIL, and to the point where the NCAA has announced they're not even going to try to enforce NIL right now because they're basically, again, that's more PR than anything. They can't. The only way to really get by this now is to create some kind of employee contract with all of their players, potentially as a collective bargaining agreement, and everyone agrees to limitations. That would allow that to happen. But I realistically, because at this point, the NCAA is going to get clobbered when it tries anything into a courtroom. I mean, you bring them to a courtroom, you say, hey, you're, I mean, the funny thing is, like, this goes both ways. Like, obviously the big story of the day was the Dartmouth basketball players formed at least voted a union. It doesn't mean they're a union yet, but they had their NLRB, pardon me, vote, and 13-2. They said they want to form a union. Now it's to be appealed. We'll see where the appeal goes. Could take years, quite possibly. But it's an interesting situation because some of you may remember Northwestern. It was like 2014 and 2015. Their players, the football team, wanted to form a union. The NRB said, we're not going to let you. But it was a very unique reason why. It was actually the same reason that hurts the NCAA in their arguments. They said, you're the only private school in a conference with a bunch of public universities. We only can enforce these rules on private companies and private institutions. So it would create an inherent disadvantage for it. Like, they didn't want to interfere with the market. They said, if we say Northwestern players can unionize and we can't as an entity force any of the public universities to do that, we're going to have accidentally interfered with the business. So that's why, of course, now shift to what just happened today. Dartmouth, private school, Ivy League, all private schools. This could easily snowball into all of them being able to form some kind of unions. So that could be one of the steps we get to where we start to see collective bargaining and potential salaries. It's really interesting because that may be the only way to control some of the things that a lot of fans or people in the public are not thrilled with, the idea of unlimited transfers and the ability for players to move wherever they want. I mean, to me, it's kind of interesting because over the years, there was all these arguments of like, oh, the players should get what they deserve, financial compensation, but they can't transfer. I think people tried to picture it working like the pros without realizing the pros have the CBAs and the other unionized agreements that allow them to have limits that they and the owners have agreed to. There's so much layering to this that it's absolutely fascinating because so many of the people that were like, I dislike the NCAA. I hope they blow up. They didn't realize if you blow up the NCAA, they're kind of like, oh, that's what happens. Well, yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing. What happens when you disarm the NCAA completely? One other enforcement thing I wanted to mention just before I forget, and I'll get to Ski Masks Murphy, but the state of Iowa has dismissed all charges against all those student athletes at Iowa and Iowa State that were being charged with sports gambling. But here's the whole situation there. I want to be clear. This is not because they weren't gambling. It's because, yes, they were all gambling. The problem was they used apparently some computer program that they decided exceeded the scope of what permitted use. Basically, they improperly obtained evidence kind of situation here. And I think the attorney general or whoever was bringing these charges decided, like, this isn't worth it anymore. We're just going to drop all the charges. So there was technically things that should not have been happening, but no one's going to end up being charged for it. So I guess things returned to where they were at those two schools. But a lot of players were not able to play this past season because of all of that. So needless to say, there are some very disgruntled Cyclones and Hawkeyes fans out there about all of this. Ski Masks Murphy.
Yeah, keeping with the theme of, I guess, this whole off season, because you brought it up a few of these weeks, is that there's sort of like these changing tides that aren't happening in the NCAA, but around the NCAA that are going to affect college football. And one thing you did bring up was like the students population, like the shrinkage that's coming. And I wondered if you were aware of that. Last week, the state of Mississippi, one person inside of their Senate proposed a bill basically saying that the state of Mississippi, they need to at least shut down 3 of their public universities by the summer of 2028.
From what I understand, that guy has proposed it before. At one point, he proposed 5. So it sounds like it probably won't go anywhere from what the more I read into it, because apparently this guy just really wants to close universities in the state of Mississippi. Like, that's his.
Well, he wants. It's more so targeted at HBCUs because when you look at the 8 schools, you know which 3 of those schools aren't going to be put on the list to be closed down. But it also, like, other senators, sort of, I read their comments over. Is like he's crazy, but also they are looking at a shortfall of students that they're going to have to start rolling back. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. Because I mean, when you look at I believe the bottom four in terms of enrollment, that there's a whole fiasco. It's funny because three of them are HBCUs. It's like Mississippi Valley State. I always forget how to say it, but that campus
Mississippi
is
Valley State,
fascinating because I
Jackson
looked it
State.
up one time, and it's like a little island. It's not a literal island, but it's like away from this tiny town, and it is just like its own little like entity. I forgot who the other three were, but they were. But the school that also struck me was the Mississippi University for Women, only because they've had a whole side story. I don't know if anyone's. This is totally not related to football. They're co-ed for the record, but they tried to change their name because they wanted to stop. I guess they were trying to like make people realize they're not like just only for women anymore. But they picked a name that was so lame that they had to retract it after like 3 weeks. It was like going to be Mississippi Brightwell University or something like that. And the reason they called it that way is I forgot. It was totally. It was a made up word, and the lady who was the president of the university decided she liked it because it combined two or three words that she really liked. And everyone was like, "This sounds terrible. We sound like a for-profit online university now." So now they're back to being the Mississippi University for Women, but I think their official nickname is the W. So they might be one of those ones on the chopping block. I've also heard the other theory is instead of necessarily eliminating these schools, they would just combine them. We've seen that happen before. I know, Georgia has done that a couple of times. There's a couple of schools in Georgia that are actually just like combinations of other schools that they've
That's how Kennesaw State is moving up. They took over Southern Polytechnical State University.
Yeah, and I know like it was
It's a lot.
Armstrong State, and I think Georgia Southern absorbed them. So that's why Georgia Southern has kind of a satellite campus near Savannah. So I could see that. I mean, but yeah, the real crunch from the demographic change that we're about to see is going to be the small private colleges that were, the local college you would go to, 100 years ago when you didn't want to hop on a train or, take a carriage to wherever you're going to go to school. I guess 100 years ago they would have had cars, but, I'm still thinking 1980s when I grew up, right? So, those schools are the ones that are going to be hurt the most because a lot of times when we hear, like, for example, as I open the show, Division II Notre Dame College in Ohio, they're going to close. I mean, most people did not know there was a Notre Dame College in Ohio. So those smaller colleges. Those are the ones that are going to be the ones that are going to be in real danger in the next dozen years when we reach the bottom of the number of students that are applying to school. It'll start to climb up again, but demographics are a weird thing. And again, I feel bad for those who were born in 1990 and 1991, although it's so funny because as someone who was born myself in 1979, I'm old enough to remember when the group of kids were reaching certain points because suddenly we heard, oh man, it's so expensive to get an apartment in the city. Well, it's because there were more of you guys than ever trying to leave college and all move into the cities all at once. Now it's like, oh, it's so expensive to get a house in the suburbs. So it's like, well, there's so many more of you guys all now trying to move into the suburbs now that you all have families. It sucks. I don't envy the people in that circumstance, but it's absolutely a fascinating thing to see how that's come together. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. We've been going on for about an hour. Yay me. I've got to wake up at like 5:45 because my kid has to go to a camp. It's a stay away camp for his school. So they want us to have them ready on the buses at 6:30. Now, there was a time in my life where waking up at 5:45 wasn't that bad. I am not in that point anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting ready to shut this down so I can get some sleep and hopefully not run over anybody important on my way to drop them off at the bus. But all right, everybody. So I just wanted to thank all of you for listening. I want to thank everyone who joined us up here. All of you are always welcome, and you always add so much of the conversation. On Tuesday nights, we talk about college football. We talk about things going on. My name is Bobak Ha'Eri. This will automatically turn into recording as soon as it's done. I'll try and get to upload this wherever you get your podcast. It's our CFB Talk. Hope all of you have a great night. Now I'm going to hang up and listen.